about the 2-hour mark, I'm like, I need to take a break from this. Just psychologically, it's a lot to take in. Is Caligula like you've never seen it before? Because really, you haven't. You have not seen a single frame of this movie. It is Caligula, the ultimate cut. Alonso, you got to tell us about this movie.
I am no man as I am all men. And therefore I am a god.
Sure. So yes, in 1980, there was the infamous Caligula, which had started out as a movie written by Gore Vidal and starring the likes of Malcolm McDowell and Helen Mirren and Peter O'Toole, John Gielgud. People had high expectations that this would be a thoughtful and literate and provocative film. But then producer Bob Guccione, best known as the publisher of Penthouse, decided there weren't enough titties. And so he shot a whole bunch of extra porny footage and stuck it in there, much to the chagrin of everyone involved. Gore Vidal had his name taken off. Malcolm McDowell, other cast members, really kind of embarrassed by the whole thing. But then a couple years ago, somebody went through and constructed, using alternate takes, alternate camera angles, and all new footage, a brand new cut of Caligula, the ultimate cut, that is designed to be more in line with what all of these folks apparently had in mind when this movie went into production. It is now 3 hours long, and it's hitting theaters on its way to streaming and physical media. So basically, it tells the story of Emperor Caligula, played by McDowell, who is the son of Tiberius, whom he basically kills to take the throne, and how he basically, gives into his madness and his excesses. He has an incestuous relationship with his sister Drusilla. He rules with an iron fist, sometimes literally, and essentially just gets to a place where everybody has to stab him, because that's what you do with Roman emperors who think they're gods and that they can do whatever they want. There are certainly more glimmers here of, I guess, what Gore Vidal had in mind in terms of making a film about politics and absolute power and the decadence of the Roman emperors and that kind of thing. And that's certainly, I think, a step above the kind of smuttiness and nonsense of the original Caligula. That said, I found this movie really boring. Like, it reminds you why in movies like, I don't know, Spartacus, these sort of the kind of Roman epics that we're used to. Like, yes, you have your palace intrigue and your kind of political, figurative or literal backstabbing, but then occasionally you get like a big battle sequence or something to kind of like liven things up. And here you don't get a lot of that. You get like a lot of naughtiness in the background, some occasional moments that are, somewhat sexually explicit. But it's mostly just a lot of talking. And it's not like Caligula has an arc. He's kind of batshit from the moment we meet him in the movie through the end of the film. And so it doesn't really have a lot to say about the politics of that or any other era. Although, certainly those with a mind to do so could read a certain current political figure onto Caligula without too much of a stretch.
It's impossible not to, but we'll get to that in a sec. Yeah.
Totally. The sets are gorgeous. They're created by the legendary Danilo Donato, but they are all shot kind of flatly. So there's a lot of proscenium going on here. So, I appreciate the production design, but the cinematography kind of undercuts it. The performers are committed to the bit. I'll give them that, certainly. And I think this movie, if it's meant to be kind of an antidote to a somewhat scrubbed up Roman Empire that we got in, Ben-Hur, Cleopatra, you name it, those kind of movies, yes, they are at least kind of addressing more the sort of like the decadence and the sexual indulgence of those characters. This is a movie that still doesn't work, but it doesn't work in a different way than the other Caligula. How about that?
Yeah, it never quite reconciles these kind of conflicting instincts here, whether it wants to be this very stately historical epic or it wants to be hot. Like it never really finds a middle ground where those two kinds of film marry comfortably. Because the sex, as you say, which is, so infamous in the original Caligula, it becomes background din. It's just sort of like cavorting, and then things that really aren't sexy because you're looking at them like, huh? Like, how does the swing work? Like, there are certain things that are not sexy. There's just like people kind of writhing around in veils, and then you hear like porn, like
moaning,
groans in the background, whatever. And so that doesn't really work. The production design and the costume design are really impressive. Like, increasingly what Caligula wears gets like more elaborate and more sparkly and more fanciful as he sees his power. I disagree that he has no arc, because in the beginning he just seems impetuous and impulsive, and there's a lot of Malcolm McDowell's Clockwork Orange character to him. There's like a sadistic sort of playfulness to him, but as he seizes more and more power, the cruelty is the point.
True.
And we see that at the wedding scene with the rapes.
Yes.
Which is a place where like I had to stop. Like, this movie is 3 hours long, and about the 2 hour mark, I'm like, I need to take a break from this. Just psychologically, it's a lot to take in if you're gonna see it in a theater. Like,
yeah, I watched it in 2 pieces as well.
It's a lot to sit through, both in terms of its length and in terms of just the oppressive nature of the sadism. And again, I realize that is the point, and that is what they're trying to convey to us about absolute power corrupting absolutely, and that manifests itself in ways that are really shocking, but also, it's Caligula getting everyone to go, meh, and just, and stop, start, hop up and down, crawl, just the most primal kinds of orders that he is barking at them because he can. I do think there's an extremism eventually to his lust for power here.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. He does get worse as the movie proceeds, but
you see him in bed with his sister. The first time you see him, he's having sex with his sister.
Yes, for the first of many times in this film.
Helen Mirren's really great in this, because this is like young Helen Mirren.
There's a lot more Helen Mirren in this version than there was in the first one. There's about 9 minutes of her the first time around, and here's a lot more, and she gets a lot more to do.
Right, a lot more to do. She's very, very, very sexy here, but also like you see some of the seeds of the kind of quiet power that I think she's known for in a lot of her roles, and so she is very good here. I have never seen the original Caligula. Have you?
I have. Okay. The day I turned 18, a bunch of friends of mine rented it on VHS and brought it over, and
friends.
Yeah, it was a scarring moment, but I have seen Caligula. And
so is this better?
I mean, again, it feels like more of an actual film, like there's a lot more dialogue and a lot more I mean, seriously, there's like so many kind of just random inserts of like people fucking in the other one that don't really have anything to do with anything, but they just thought, oh, the audience isn't going to be here for all these conversations, So this one is definitely much more of, like I said, there's more Helen Mirren. I'm sure there's a lot more of the guy who plays Longinus, who's the sort of like the guy who gets stuck carrying out all these commands, and you can tell he's just like, there's a slow boil going, and eventually that's going to go off. So yeah, there's way more palace intrigue in this version, which is the point, I guess, because that's what we get so much of. This is a far nobler failure than the original Caligula. The original Caligula is not even a noble failure. It's just like, what the hell is this thing, And, I remember when that movie came out, I was obviously way too young to see it. I was like 13, but it was the subject of an obscenity trial in Atlanta where I grew up. So every day in the paper, they sent the film critic to cover the trial, and she would file a thing every day about, well, here's what happened. And then they said this, and then they, and then at one point, like the jury and everybody had to go see the movie, and she wrote about that. And it was this whole ongoing thing. So I remember being very, very controversial and talked about and whatever when it originally came out. But it's not, the original one's not good, and this one's better, but maybe still not good.
Eleanor Ringel Gillespie?
Eleanor Ringel Gillespie. Yeah, she is the film critic I grew up reading.
That's so great. I think Malcolm McDowell's good in it. So, as much as he can be, but he's impossible not to watch. There's a fascinating kind of like creepy quality about him and unpredictability to his presence that is very watchable.
John Gielgud brings to it what you would think John Gielgud would bring to this thing, which is like, it's as though we were watching, Caesar and Cleopatra or some other Shakespeare adaptation. Right. He has that great plummy old theatrical sense. Peter O'Toole is great in his handful of scenes. yeah, Helen Mirren is terrific. I look, kudos to Malcolm McDowell for taking this on and for like totally plunging into it. I mean, he is naked or nearly naked a lot in this movie, which for somebody of his stature in like the late 70s was, still kind of a big deal. He's not phoning it in any way, but I just think that the movie ultimately is really repetitive. And if Vidal had larger points to make about politics, and certainly he covered this era in his novels and other stuff like that, I don't think this is the most successful manifestation of that idea from him.
Yeah, it does take a long time to get going too. It's very, very talky and dry off the top, but eventually it gets better. So what's your number then?
Like a 5.5. I mean, there's a lot of good pieces here and some really cool sets that are shot like shit. But yeah, ultimately I found this to be a letdown.
I would say 5.2, and a lot of that just has to do with what it took to reconstruct this, and the vision of it.
That's amazing. And I love the idea of like, if you had told me before I saw it, yes, we've taken this maligned film that at one point had promise of being something better, and we put it back together, and we've really tried to capture what the original screenplay was about. I'm like, yes, great, I want to see that. And then you see it, it's like, well, better luck next time. But yeah, theoretically, I love the idea of this, and I love, everybody's always talking about The Day the Clown Cried and whether or not we're ever going to get to see footage of that. Jerry Lewis never really finished that movie. So like if somebody gets access to that footage and wants to then try and compile it into something, I mean, sure, why not? Go for it.
Interesting experiment. All right. Will you see Caligula, the ultimate cut? Let us know.